Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and I thought it would be great to have a conversation about balanced versus imbalanced kingdoms. And what are some of the pros and cons surrounding each of them? Whether it be you are in home kingdom right now and you're trying to figure out, hey, how are we going to build? What are our options? Or are you about to enter your home kingdom because you haven't got there yet? Like we have a number of SB2, Season T1, SB1 kingdoms, and possibly I think still some Season 2s that have yet to enter their home kingdoms. Or are you a brand new kingdom and you have a lot of activity, you still have a lot of potential before things kind of start tapering off? And do you just want to figure out what is our best course of action? I'm going to talk about that today. So as always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you throw us up because it helps out a lot. So let's start first and foremost by, I'm going to show you 3 examples here for some kingdoms that I pulled. And then we're going to talk generally, not necessarily about these kingdoms specifically, but I just want to show you some for reference. And then we're going to talk about some of these pros and cons. We'll start with balanced pros. We'll do balanced cons. Then we'll talk about imbalanced pros and imbalanced cons. So here we go. Let's show you off the goodies here. And I just got a new monitor too. I'm actually really excited about this. Not that I don't think it's going to affect anything as far as production-wise, but for me, personally, it's nice. So here's the first one, which we have the EDS in Kingdom 96. You could see very much kind of going with a... so this is like an imbalanced kingdom approach, but this is more of a mega alliance style, right? So it's predominantly one active alliance, and you have kind of a second that is like a little bit there, but it's not really active based on how old the kingdom is and the stage for where the kingdom is at. So this is probably more of a farm alliance, if you will, right? So mainly just one active. Then we go into another example here, which is with OCOC. They're in Kingdom 18. So a younger kingdom, a little bit lower power for top alliance. Now the second alliance is a little bit stronger, right at 3 bill. So, but probably still you would consider this to be a farm. Now maybe if you merged DSOC, you brought in maybe if there was a couple people here from CDD, unless it is just made up completely of farms, and maybe DSOC hopefully isn't made up entirely of farms, right? Maybe you could push this to like 4 bill. Right, maybe 4.5 or something, where maybe it can become kind of a semi-active alliance as a second, and then you're kind of at 1.5-ish, right? Then that could be a thing. And then we're going to show you the last third example here. This is the TG family group from Kingdom 244, right? So a lot younger, if you will. But you could see very close in power, right? So this would be more of a balanced kingdom example of where you have 2 alliances that are pretty close in power. Again, not exact, because it's most likely going to be very difficult to do that. And the goal really should never be to get it exactly the same. It should just always be to get as close as possible, right? And so having this kind of within around 400 million, right, plus or minus, this is still a good example of what a balanced kingdom would look like. Now, let's talk about some of these pros and cons. So for this part, like I said, we're going to start with balanced pros. So some of these are equal competitive motivation. And what do I mean by that? So when you have balanced alliances, nobody feels the need. Like when you're looking at the leaderboard as an example, right? So like let's go in here and I'll show you, right? So you're looking at, and let's just use the top 3. This is a great example. Obviously, these groups are not all from the same kingdom, with the exception of TFS and Echo, even though I think Echo is now gone somewhere else, etc. But point is that if they stayed all in the same kingdom, right, then TFS and Echo would be, right, a really great example of 2 balanced alliances in potentially in the same kingdom. And so let's just use this as an example, even though this is a KVK map or KVK division. And so let's say you had 3 alliances of equal power. Now, again, in this example, they're probably not going to be that high for any given kingdom, right? So just stick with me for the point. Is that if you have 3 alliances that are all within, 550, a little 500 plus million of each other, which is still a very small gap, what you end up getting from this is a level of visual fairness, because no one is so much more overpowering than another at face value, when kind of the average player in a kingdom would go and look at leaderboards, they're not going to see an alliance that is out of reach. They're going to see alliances that are within reach. And this is where you get into this idea of having equal competitive motivation, because the equality is there. There's fairness there about that because of the balance. This can create a more competitive atmosphere, and it can also motivate players to participate and engage a lot more. Now, whether that's in things that are happening in the kingdom, in KVK, and just getting more people to kind of transfer or transition into being more interactive and engaging in those fights and other situations we'll talk about in a bit, there's a lot of visual and psychological benefits to having a balanced approach for alliances in a kingdom. Number 2, everyone feels that they can compete with anyone. This is kind of a build out to point to number 1. And again, that's because there is not some kind of overwhelming gap or difference in power. And this goes into, like I was saying, is that you have players that are now going to feel more willing to engage, whether that's in things like war games, if that's in things such as KVK, if that's alliance via alliance events internally within the kingdom. Players will be more willing to show up, participate, and engage because they have this sense of that, I can compete with them, or our alliance can compete with that alliance. And that's very much a perspective and a mentality that you want to try to instill in a kingdom. Number 3, no one is left behind. Everyone can participate equally, or you could say equally-ish. And again, these are balanced pros. Building off of 1 and 2, this, again, idea that if you have balanced alliances, no one at the bottom or the middle will feel like they're really left out, as much as they maybe would if you had an imbalanced approach or or great power gaps between active alliances in a kingdom. And because, again, the alliances are close in power, those that are more at the bottom average, power medium, or bottom middle will now also feel that they can participate, that they can show up and support and be of value, more likely than, again, if it was an imbalanced approach. Number 4. Usually when you have a balanced kingdom style with it for the alliances there, your spending can be spread out. And because your spending isn't being consolidated into one alliance, more players get to benefit. So you have this rising tide literally lifting all the boats, right? So it's not just a single tide lifting one boat. It's here's some boats, and here's some boats. And so, again, it depends on how many alliances you have in your kingdom. Active, we should say. But if you are able to spread out the spending, more players on average get to benefit from that, because instead of you consolidating your spending, which is going to go towards those 200, now you're going to be able to go towards 400, 600, 800 players, again, depending on how many active alliances are there. And because of that, even if, and this is the thing people understand, even if the spending amount is the same, there is a huge psychological difference here between the 200 players in a single alliance that are getting kind of a high, and I'm just going to give some extremes, a high level spending threshold versus taking that same high level spending threshold and spreading it out amongst 400, 600 to 800 players. The thing you have to consider is now the players who are on those low, bottom, middle end of powers, and maybe even a little bit more, but mostly for those, will also feel the need to have a jolt of continued engagement and continued motivation, because now they're able to benefit from something that they otherwise may not have been able to because of a balanced alliance approach. And that goes so long to just having good, sustainable health in the kingdom for how individuals feel about that, because they're also able to get a little bit of that pie. Goes a long way, more than you may think. Number 5, rally leaders can also be spread out, usually in balanced alliance approaches. And this is something that can also elicit more average participation from the players in those alliances in kingdoms that take a balanced alliance approach. And this is because when you have rally leaders that are spread out, you have captains, you have on-field generals, if you will, people that are the big boys that also can lead a charge, can attack, can defend, can be a rally lead, a garrison captain. This also instills, right? It's almost kind of like, you're fighting in war and you have your captain or someone you've looked up to, and they're, they're the supervisor, they're leading the charge, right? You're more likely to rally behind those people and to want to go and fight with them compared to if you didn't have someone big out on the field. So again, it's another bonus, a positive psychological effect that can ripple to others when you have that situation happening. Number 6, the value of everyone is equal when representation is equal. And what this means is that players, regardless of which alliance you're in this balanced kingdom, is that because most likely your alliance and the other active balanced alliances are of equal close to ish power, you on average will also have an equal representation of average player power in your alliance on all tier levels, from the high to the middle to the bottom. And when you are allowing yourself to have said equal representation across all areas from alliance to alliance, it will also allow for you to feel that you as an individual have just as much value in what you can do in your role compared to another person who, even if they may have a different set of expectations and tasks and role assignments put on them. So it's all kind of this big circle of life, if you will. Number 7, players are less likely to move alliances or moving for the wrong reasons. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit more later on, but one of the things, and one of the things that oftentimes you will see players do is, and I usually refer to these players as ladder climbers, right? Because they just basically some people will just want to keep trying to climb the ladder as high as they can, and they'll work their way from the number 4, number 3, number 2, all the way to the number 1 alliance if they're able to. And so when you have equal powered alliances, or very close to equally balanced alliances, you almost kind of kill this idea of, I need to join a stronger alliance because no one is really that much stronger than another, right? So it's less likely, there's less incentive that you're going to see some kind of high volume level of movement between players within kingdoms. It really at that point kind of falls more on, is that individual able to find an alliance that meets their activity window? And then do they like the management team in that particular alliance and the people that are there, right? So it really becomes a lot more internal reasoning rather than it is external for something like the power of alliances. Number 8 is that war games and alliance versus alliance events, etc., are more fair. We alluded to this a little earlier, is that when you have balanced alliances, you're more than likely able to say, my alliance can compete with your alliance. I'm now more willing as an individual to invest more into this event because I know that my alliance is really close in power to the other alliances that are participating. So now me as an individual, I'm more willing to participate because I don't view this as, we're just going to lose this alliance versus alliance event because the alliance is 5 or 6 billion power stronger than us. Right now I'm more engaged. I'm more active. I want to be participating more. This just increases those likelihoods of happening. Next one we get to, I think, is number 9, which is sharing territory, right? So you're sharing territory, resources, and rewards equally, whether that be at the same time or in some kind of a rotation. But this, in and of itself, also means that everyone feels as though they are getting the same share, whether it's at the exact moment or if it's at some kind of an interval, rotation, or cycle. And this in and of itself also allows for people to not feel left out on getting things or getting more than another, right? And so that is something that, again, if people can really buy into something like that, it can be a benefit. And to me, I truly believe that that is a pro, is that especially when we're talking about if we're looking at kind of a baseline foundation or a common denominator of we want our kingdoms to be as active as possible and to sustain that activity for as long as possible. Then we get to number 10, which is the opportunity to have multiple active alliances. If you come into a brand new kingdom with a balanced alliance approach and you can get people to buy into that earlier rather than later, you run the humongous advantage of being able to have multiple, a handful, more than a handful of active alliances in your kingdom. And this was something that we tested and did in my Kingdom 65 project, where we ended up having, I think it was 9 alliances, and then we kind of whittled it eventually down to 7 as we got closer to Zone 2. And we were looking really good with 7 alliances. I mean, I dare say we probably effortlessly would have went into Zone 3 with 6 active and full alliances at that point. And a lot of that is because, and even that wasn't like the best that we probably could have done. There was obviously other things that happened in 65, but to go from Zone 1 to keep as many people alive and active and willing to continue in the kingdom really allowed for us to get to that point and to create that opportunity for what could have been. And so these are things that, again, you may have opportunities to do yourself. Number 11. We'll do 1-1. When you have a balanced alliance approach, you have a low percentage of player drop-off, which means that you're also going to have longer player retention that I just alluded to. The idea is that most people, and I don't want to get into kind of the philosophical stuff too much. I want to kind of try to keep it just to the points, the main points, as much as I can. But to give you a little bit here, the idea is that if you give enough people an opportunity and a reason, a realistic reason to keep playing, right, they may very much take you up on that offer. Number 12. I think that's how it's going to look when you guys look at me. If you don't fit into one alliance, like we mentioned, when it comes to activity windows, maybe certain management styles, right, you may have other opportunities to join other alliances instead of maybe there's only one alliance there, and then it's like, okay, what do you do if you don't fit into that alliance? So being able to have multiple active alliances really allows for a level of flexibility, and it doesn't always mean that that alliance is bad. Sometimes it just may not be the right fit for what really would be very reasonable expectations. Now let's get into some of the cons here for balanced kingdoms. So some of the cons are going to be some players by nature, as I mentioned before, are ladder climbers, disruptors, if you will. And disruptors might be aggressive. I'll just say ladder climbers for short. But it kind of leads into disrupting to a degree. So if you're someone who very much likes to ladder climb, this can disrupt a balanced kingdom because you would basically have to have all the alliance leaders and the officers on the same page, where they would not be allowing people in who are just climbing the ladder to climb the ladder. I've been to situations where in some of my projects I've had some leaders and officers who would accept people, even though it didn't happen too often. When it did, it very much became a big issue. Bigger than it probably should have been, but at the same time, big to the people who understood what the project was and what the beliefs were and what the standards and expectations that we had set early on. And so those are some cons because it can really generate a level of disruption that is bigger and sometimes wider spread than you may believe, and that can cause other ripple effects. Number 2 for cons is that rogue groups can quickly rise if they are not addressed quickly. In 65, we had a situation like this, where we had a rogue group really it started off as just a few players that just kind of wanted to do their own thing, and then it quickly escalated to kind of more of a rogue endeavor. And I say rogue not by them individually, as though that was their mentality going into the kingdom, but based on what ended up happening and the fact that they kind of went against what really at that point was the majority identity of what the kingdom was already shaping to be. right? It wasn't as though you only had 1, 2, or 3 alliances that were kind of on board for this, right? It was the majority of alliances in the kingdom that represented that had the most overall combined strength in the kingdom throughout all of the zones. Zone 1s, I should say, that really were all on board, even though, of course, all of those alliances, and then some of them, right, most of those alliances, of course, were within our family, but then some of them were also external. And they understood, they kind of got what the bigger picture was at that time. And so what I mean is that when you look at kind of rogue factions, it's really those individuals that are going against the majority, generally speaking, of course. And so this really gives an opportunity where if you don't kind of stamp that fire out sooner than later, it can really inflame and grow to be something bigger than you probably hoped it didn't become, generally speaking. Then you get to the third one, which is a larger network means that there could be more issues, challenges, hurdles that you would have to overcome. And a larger network meaning a larger player base. When you're running kind of a balanced kingdom approach, there's a higher percentage chance of likelihood that your kingdom is going to be more active than that of an imbalanced kingdom. You're going to have less player drop-off, longer, better retention over a period of time, and just a larger community. And because of that, you have to kind of deal with what happens when you have a higher amount of individuals that are within your kingdom. It just breeds. It doesn't mean that these things will happen. It just means that the percentage chance of them happening is higher because you have more people, so you can just have more things that occur. Then we get to number 4, which is when you're running balanced kingdoms, it requires more attention to detail, which means that you have to very much be dialed in on things like new player education and reminders, or friendly reminders as I call them. And it really requires I don't want to say like a meticulous hand, but it requires a level of attention and a level of awareness, I'll say very much so that is a lot more than what it would be if you just had one alliance or even 2 alliances in the kingdom, right? Even though usually in imbalanced kingdoms is typically more of like kind of a mega alliance or single alliance approach. And so when you just have more bodies and more heads you have to look after, right? These are things that can happen. Now let's talk about imbalanced kingdoms. So imbalanced kingdoms, let's talk about the pros for running an imbalanced kingdom. And this is more so in the idea if you are running one alliance in that kingdom, just for example, mostly. Even though they can be 1 to 2 alliances. In most cases, it's usually 1. So, and when I say imbalance, I really mean like a mega alliance structure for the most part. But again, we're still kind of including the 1 to 2. So one of the pros, number 1, would be that you allow yourself to have the best rewards, the best resources, and the best territory, as they would usually go to the number 1 alliance at minimum. Number 2, on average, you will usually see 1 to 2 active alliances, though, as we alluded to before, mostly it's 1 alliance, and it's kind of everyone funneling in right to that 1%, or top 2%, if you will, kind of going into that single, basically condensing and kind of funneling. Number 3, a tighter-knit group can allow for you to do things like build relationships and rapport faster with players, because if you have just really 1 alliance worth of players in your kingdom, you're going to see each other a lot more. You're going to interact with each other a lot more. When you think about world chat, it's mainly going to be you and your alliance players. So it's probably for the most part not so much different than your alliance chat, compared to if you're in a kingdom with 2, 3, 4 plus alliances. There's a lot more people there and a lot more people to get to know. And so when you have a smaller group, usually you're going to be able to kind of figure each other out a little bit faster. Number 4, players can buy in faster due to having a smaller community. And this is more focused on kind of buying into the vision, buying into what the idea is. And that's also because you don't have to worry as much about sending your message across multiple alliances, or hosting incredibly large town halls, or having to message individual players for things like friendly reminders where you have 4, 6, 800, right? Everything is very much condensed into a smaller group and community, so it allows, it's like the difference between going to a college that has 24 students per class compared to 200 students per class, right? The smaller class is going to be getting a lot more attention and usually a lot more focused, a lot more hands-on attention, if you will, kind of compared to a college class that has 200 people. Then we get to, I think, where we at, number 4 or 5? 5. You have this situation where when you are replenishing activity, you have a little bit more of a kind of hyper focus on what you're looking for. And usually if you're kind of rolling with a 1 to 2 alliance kingdom, it's a little bit more clear cut on who you're looking to bring in, which means that because you're not maybe going for a wider range, you also are able to kind of have leaner people that are coming in, right? Kind of trimming more of that fat, if you will, especially if you're looking to kind of build predominantly a fighting vanguard alliance. You have this opportunity to really get kind of the leanest or the fattiest or the least fatty pieces, if you will, of players. Not to refer to you guys as meat, but you get what I'm saying. And so, again, I think that's a benefit. Number 6, your spending is rewarded with others who spend, which usually means kind of high gold chest, high chest rates that you see hitting your gift levels each season incredibly fast, even though I believe now that won't be happening. But again, when resets were happening, obviously it was still relevant. But again, even if it's just with the spending, right, you know that you're going to, there's other people that are going to be spending as well. So it's very much kind of the single tide raising the single boat just a lot faster, right? So it's like this compared to maybe like this, right? And then let's get into some cons for Imbalanced. And keep in mind, I'm not going over everything. I'm just going over some things for each of these 4 sections. So an Imbalanced cons would be all alliances can become isolated and ostracized quickly who are not the number 1 alliance, and even in some cases the number 2. And this is usually happening more in the beginning of kind of a new kingdom where you are trying to figure out, who's going to be where's everyone starting, who's climbing the boards as an alliance here or there, and who's going to clash, etc. And so if you're really focused on kind of going in this imbalanced route, you very quickly will see players that will leave other alliances to join the number 1, right? It's almost like the moment that you kind of start seeing a decent level of separation, and depending on how the recruiting's being done, you can very much kind of see the number 1 just kind of go into hyperdrive, if you will, and really start spreading the gap between the number 2 and remaining alliances below. And this is something that can allow for other alliances, again, to kind of feel almost demotivated, if you will, which kind of goes into that isolation and feeling ostracized. Number 2 is that you would usually have a high percentage player drop-off rate. And again, it's partly because of what happens in point number 1, and this is just kind of a byproduct of that, and also because usually if you're the number 1 alliance, you're probably going to try and get, again, the best rewards, the best behemoths, all the first occupations, right, with the exception of double ups. You'll probably go for best territory. You'll probably go for best villages, etc. Right, getting the passes first, maybe denying access to others getting in. These are all things that can happen. Number 3, up to all other alliances can unite against you if you do not address these things quickly. Now, this may not necessarily happen as often as some would think, but it does happen, and I've seen this happen. So that is something that I think can be a con. Number 4, and the last one, is that if things go bad for you as an individual in said alliance, in said kingdom, you most likely will have to migrate out. And when I say go bad for you, that can be anything from you just not wanting to be there anymore, from maybe getting excluded from rewards, from maybe just eventually having bad active window times, or whenever you're on, only a minority of people are on, so you're not really able to participate. Is that if you're only there in a kingdom where there's 1 active alliance, maybe 2, but usually 1, you quickly have to kind of almost adapt, if you will, to the environment and the situation you're in, because if you don't, and things don't end up working out for any number of reasons, you don't really have options on anywhere else you can go, right? Because at this point, now you'd have to migrate out. And usually, if you're in single alliance kingdoms, it's a very much a high risk, high reward situation, Because now that you have migration permits that are out, you very much have to be so conscientious, or whatever. I'll just say conscious. You have to be conscious and self-aware of who you are, what do you like to do, how do you like to play, versus the alliance that you're in and what they're about. You really have to do some kind of auditing, if you will, and some analysis of yourself and the situation you're in to figure out if you are going to need to start getting permits earlier or later. But yeah, for me, I think that that's a really big thing, because with this high risk, high reward, like, it really makes it challenging for strong players, especially that are playing in these kinds of kingdoms and in these alliances, where if things go bad, like, they can go really, like, it can be a lot worse for you than you think, because you'd have to go and buy all these permits, and then you'd have to find a place that would be able to accept you via special migration in most cases, because you're probably already going to be exceeding the 55 mil threshold, even if that is for Season of Strife on the high end, if you're talking about the amount of people that are above 55 mil, which is a lot. So, again, do with that what you will. I'd love to hear from you guys, though, right? This is it for me. These are my pros and cons for balanced versus imbalanced kingdoms. Even though I didn't necessarily cover every single thing that I believe is a factor, I wanted to cover at least maybe some of the more prevalent ones. And of course, I'd love to hear from you. If you've been in a balanced kingdom, even if it's not Call of Dragons and it's another kingdom builder, let me know what you think some pros and cons are, even if they're ones that I didn't mention. I'd love to hear. And then the same thing on the opposite side. If you've played in kind of a mega alliance kingdom, or a kingdom that's predominantly 1 to 2 strong alliances and everyone else is just kind of dead, or there's no one really else there, what do you think some pros and cons are there? Let me know in those comments down below. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later.